Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight on a little bit of a stormy evening, but we are glad to have you with us here at Faith and Global Engagement's first McDonald Distinguished Lecture Series of the semester. My name is Jonathan, and I just want to welcome you here tonight. We're very excited to have you here to talk about this special topic. You can see behind me on the screen, we'll be talking tonight about the spiritual and art. And even as you made your way here to the library, you notice that you have to come by the Don Juan Caves. And we see an example there of beautiful ancient art that took a lot of time and had to be made very carefully and slowly. But also on campus, for those of you who are familiar with where we are, there's another type of art which is not so slow, and that is AI everywhere. The student posters and even some of the faculty are using AI. And so there's a great contrast and a great question, we can say, about what is the role of the spiritual in art? What is art? What motivates it? And we are very delighted and honored to have tonight fantastic guests for this. We were thrilled to find out that Makoto Fujimura was on his way through to Taiwan, and he was so kind to come to HKU. And we appreciate Heijin and Makoto coming to share with us. As many of you will know already, he is not only an amazing world-renowned artist with artworks that are in museums and galleries around the world, but also as well a wonderful teacher and author. And I know many of you have been encouraged by his works like Culture Care, Faith and Art. And N.T. Wright had said in the foreword of that book that Makoto was one of those rare artists that not only knew how to say what he's doing and why he's doing it, but also how it relates to his broader worldview. So we're just thrilled to have him here today. And if you weren't aware of this, at the end of the time of his sharing, we'll have a chance to have some question and answers. So we hope you'll stay with us. Let's welcome him, and thank you for being here as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming out. I know this was last minute preparations, and I want to thank Professor Daniel Chua for, even though he cannot be here, arranging this time for me to be back at this university. I was here a long time ago, it seems, for a project related to T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, using bringing art and music together, and it's great to be back. I'm here with my wife, Heijin, and she will be part of what I call beauty and justice conversation. I won't go into too much detail, but it does relate to our topic, spiritual and art. What I'm going to do is, Daniel wanted me to address one particular book on this topic by Kandinsky, and I'm going to start with his thesis in this book concerning the spiritual and art. And this book is rather a seminal book, published between the wars, but I think it was a conversation that began very early on as he wrestled with modernism, wrestled with the first Great War that caused so many of the artists to question what was happening, both in terms of obviously the frontline experience of many of these artists that led to this searching for what it means to be human, how art can address trauma and darkness, and to many it was an awakening experience of realizing so much of what we attempt to do in our ideals of humanity, and as modernism saw itself as kind of human advancement for a better world created through technology and so forth. And yet they were faced with literally frontline experience of realizing that this so-called advancement has not led to improvement in terms of how we view each other and how countries still have this assumption that you must live in the scarcity mindset, that you use technology to take over domains and territories, and if those expressions seem familiar, it's because we still haven't left that area of questioning. And Kandinsky was one of those people who very much honestly wrestled with these questions. So it's a relatively short book. You can probably read it in one sitting. I remember reading this as a student and being really impressed by the thesis that Kandinsky was pouring out. And now Kandinsky was one of the founders of Bauhaus movement, which began this collection of artists like Paul Klee and others who, many of them became seminal figures in modern art. But at the time, they were kind of isolated bunch of artists who pushed back against darkness. And in this quote, Kandinsky says, "Color is a power which directly influences the soul, connecting the spiritual to what art can do through color. Color is the keyboard, the eyes are the harmonies, and soul is the piano with many strings." A great overlap of language and metaphors, which is quite appropriate to quote here in context of the music you heard with Professor Chuo's music. My previous time I was here was with T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, a poem that was turned into an orchestra piece by a composer, Chris Theophanides, and two painters, myself and Bruce Herman, created rather large works surrounding, in this kind of immersive experience, responding to Eliot's poems, and then bringing that into various universities like Hong Kong University. And so the overlap that Kandinsky is talking about here with color as having sound is very significant for me and for us thinking about that. And Kandinsky had synesthesia, which is this condition that one can see or hear sound when you see color, or detect smell of certain type, particular smell when you see yellow. So he naturally gravitated toward color having more than function for the eye, that it was a sensory or experience that created abundance and multiple, I might say prismatic ways that color will function. And he goes on to say in this book, color is one way that this influence to the soul can happen, but another way is composition. So here, in example of Kandinsky's work, I'll show you another one, which is this painting, which is literally called composition. And he is composing through his abstracted colors and forms, orchestra piece, as it were. And for this to be done in early 20th century is quite a remarkable achievement when we really didn't have an example of many people attempting to use colors and forms in this fashion. So Daniel asked me to talk about Kandinsky. I happen to be very influenced by Kandinsky's work in ways that this connection between color and form and the soul. I will attempt to address that and then go into some of the ways that I have found helpful in connecting spirituality and art, what I call art and faith conversations. I wrote a book about that, so I will talk a little bit about that, as well as my new book coming out, which is called Art Is. It's an attempt to say that art, not only trying to redefine art, but to claim that art exists. Art is, and art is present in our midst. As I was coming in and seeing these cave paintings, I was reminded of my days at University of Tokyo Art School, because many of my friends did the actual copying of these caves using the materials, Nihonga material, Japanese paintings materials like malachite and azurite and many of the earth tones that they are used for these cave paintings. They were replicating them and trying to preserve them for study and museums and so forth. And I happen to use the same materials. You will note this overlap with Buddhistic murals, with what I do as an artist, and artist that has this particular belief that actually this reality that Kandinsky is talking about, that color and soul are connected, form and soul are connected, that I have ways of expressing that in my own art. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I want to mention one other artist, very close to Kandinsky. Actually, they were friends who created this movement called the Blue Rider movement, in Germany. And that is Franz Marc. Franz Marc is a very interesting example of someone who lived a very short life. He died when he was 36 in front lines of a war. But before he went to war, he painted many images like this, basically animals being caught in this fantastic array of form, as you might say. And this painting called The Fate of the Animals is a painting that I studied as a student, thinking about how Kandinsky's connection of form and color to the soul may have implications that other artists were responding to. Franz Marc is a great example of this, and kind of art that I felt I was being drawn to. And one of the ways that I saw this image was in the context of my own journey of faith, my own journey of understanding myself or not understanding myself and struggling with that journey. And then this emblem of animals being torn in the struggle, great struggle. And Franz Marc left many letters because he was a soldier in front lines to his wife. And I just happened to receive this book just prior to leaving the United States from a friend of mine who runs this publisher called Slant. And this writer, Morgan Mays, describes what Franz Marc was trying to do. And this is a very helpful context for us to think about spirituality in art. So I want to read a passage from this. Now, thinking about Franz Marc's experience in the Great War and what he was trying to do, this is in 1915, around the time that Kandinsky was writing his thesis about concerning the spiritual in art. So Morgan Mays writes this about Franz Marc. Everything that Franz Marc ever did with painting, everything that he ever wrote, both before the Great War and then as a soldier in the Great War, was an attempt to affirm that there is a vast and mighty difference between the things that are essential and the things that are non-essential. He said, I cannot overcome, Marc wrote to Maria, his wife, on December 2nd, 1915. I cannot overcome the insufficiencies and imperfections of life except by transposing the meaning of my life into the spiritual world. Let me read that again. This is a really powerful sentence, I think. I cannot overcome the insufficiencies and imperfections of life except by transposing the meaning of my life into the spiritual world. The world that is independent of the mortal body. That is, I must salvage it through abstraction. It is not really future life that I understand by the word spiritual. In that respect, you misunderstand me. But by spiritual life, I mean to separate essential from non-essential things. Now, I find this very helpful because in some ways we're talking about nebulous terms, soul, spiritual, so forth. But Franz Marc very well defines something here, which we will dwell on a little bit as I think about the theme that we are addressing. The insufficiencies and imperfections of life, right? And this reality of abstraction, which was very much new at the time, it was very transgressive, it was very much something that very few people were trying to do. Kandinsky using color as a way to get to the soul, right? And using form, abstracted form, as a way to talk about the spiritual. These were not conversations that people had before this time. So what is happening all of a sudden when all these artists were beginning to see people like Picasso, Cézanne, people like Vincent van Gogh, who Franz Marc admired very much. These were artists who were beginning to see that the world cannot be captured by simply mimicking the forms, right? So photography, moving images are coming along here. And very quickly there's this dispossession of what is capturing, artists trying to capture the material, right? That had the different focus, at least, or entirely different path. And so Kandinsky and Marc were probably first people to articulate this in a very stark and helpful ways. And Marc defines it here as something that was essential versus non-essential. And what I think he means by non-essential is not things that are useless, but actually things that are industrially driven as useful. In other words, I think what Mark is talking about is that in the reality of industrialized world, what became the form and real, what is real, is something that is transactionally, right? Some transactionally powerful or transactionally present. So that means that anything that allows for something to begin to take over the world in a new way or new useful way is assumed to be essential. But in a sense, Mark is realizing, going into this war, for example, the very thing that made us, his people, desire to became an impediment to his own humanity. So the struggle there in modern life is not so much that we have gained access to the possibilities of being able to create something that is very advantageous to utilitarian purposes, but that in doing so we lost something. We lost our souls, in a sense. And so artists, nevertheless, are looking at this and saying, well, there's something about our time with advancement that supposed to help us to be better human beings that causes us to dehumanize ourselves. So what he means by the insufficiencies, right, the imperfections of life, and art is supposed to bring meaning into our existence. But he said, I cannot overcome. What is important remains invisible in the active attempt to create something that is very useful to the world and something that we want to have, and yet at the same time we lose this essential thing that we are after. So here is the struggle. The horse is a symbol of himself, caught in this machinery of life, right? This utilitarian, pragmatic movement of technology and machines that are taking over the world, and yet he's noticing that he is under this distress, and he's literally being torn apart by this. Now, what's interesting about how he describes the emotion of this, something that is being torn apart, that is causing emotional and spiritual struggle, are the colors that Kandinsky himself talked about. Colors that points to the soul. And prior to this time, there were salon painters were using muted colors to try to describe the world, reality as reality, right? So you would make sense of the canvas as a way that the artist was describing the scene, whether it be historical scene or portraiture or landscape, as something that mimicked and replaced reality. But here there's none of that. There's even an attempt to push against that reality that is superficially described, let's say, captured by an artist. Here's a way that artist is pushing against the normative way that painting was done. And And yet, we look back at this painting and we might wonder, as I did, I don't know about you, but this captures the authentic reality of how one might feel going into a war than perhaps any historical paintings depicting war. You see, so the essence of that reality, of the struggle that we have, is captured better in primary colors, pitted against each other as this painting, with forms that are jarring and then pushing into the flesh of the animal that he is depicting. And it is interesting, on the right side, the muted colors play as a backdrop to all this. And so this painting actually captures so much of what Kandinsky was talking about. And so this is a good example of how modernist artists began to explore new ways to connect the soul, connect reality with color and depiction in ways that was not done before. Around the same time, Kazimir Malevich is painting in, well, he was born in Ukraine, but I believe he might have been in Kiev still when he painted this painting. But in Russia, the conditions of what Malevich would call spiritual was deteriorating very fast. That he a dedicated Russian Orthodox painter were not allowed to paint or write icon paintings. So he began to do these very abstract white on white, black on black paintings that many people look at and say, well, I can do that, you know. But you don't realize what he was doing. It was not just technical placing white on white, but in a place where you cannot be allowed to paint spiritual paintings as a religious icon. He needed a way to express his faith. So he began to do these white on white paintings and placed them in the corner of his room as a replacement to icons such as this. You see a black on white there on the corner. This is his room on the right. And on the left side is an icon, right? Russian Orthodox icon. And then he began to show these paintings around the same time that Kandinsky and Franz Marc and friends were showing their transgressive art. By the way, Franz Marc and Kandinsky, they were both termed degenerate artists by the Nazi regime. And their paintings were sold to fund the war. And Malevich, the same thing. He was trying to describe the spiritual in a world in which that wasn't allowed. And Alfred Barr, one of the founders of Museum of Modern Art, saw one of these paintings, brought them to New York, and that's how Museum of Modern Art began. Many people realize that when they go to Museum of Modern Art that we began with the suppression of the spiritual in the realities of their world in Russia and Germany and other countries. And so when you look at these paintings, you kind of wonder how much have we missed in terms of looking at art, especially in 20th century art. How much have we missed in terms of noting the spiritual, noting what Kandinsky connects. That color is connected to the soul, forms can be tied to the soul, and then the hidden things become real. Franz Marx saying that what is essential is not captured in just simply capturing reality as is or trying to trace the contours of a figure, but there's something essential in capturing when abstraction, when forms are broken apart, when colors are translated into primary colors. These are the thoughts that these artists had, and Alfred Barr, in creating a collection for a museum, what turns out to be a museum of modern art, saw that. Of course, Alfred Barr was a son of a Presbyterian minister. He saw art as spiritual. So what are we missing when we go into museums today and these little essentials are missing from the conversation? A friend of mine, Jonathan Anderson, noticed this as an art historian, and this is his new book called The Invisibility of Religion in Contemporary Art. Massive work, years of research went into this, and he identifies people like Malevich, people like Kandinsky, people like Paul Klee and Franz Marc as some of the initial signals that abstraction, art, modern art could only be explained when you understand the spiritual. And what Kandinsky was saying is it's not just his thing, his way of identifying what was true to him, but he was really describing the overall reality of the world in which artists cannot express anything apart from the connection to the soul. Colors and forms becoming connected. So people like Mark Rothko saw Malevich, Museum of Modern Art. Later artists, all the abstract expressionists, de Kooning, all these people were looking at these work as ashiogoki, as a stepping block to their art. So how much of invisibility of religion are we witnessing in contemporary art? That is a good question to ask when you go into any museum today. And I try to address this in my books. One that is, I'm excited about this book coming out this fall. It's called Art Is. Very beautiful and an interesting cover that Yale University Press, the wonderful designer Dustin Kilgore pushed me to do. And I'm really grateful for this effort to write a book that describes the journey of an artist, that what I see in my studio in Princeton every day is akin to attempting to translate the spiritual behind what I see. And this fabric, this invisible thread of spirituality that is so evident to me as I look at flowers and bees and birds of my backyard, forms, trees. And so many of you know that I translate that into what one might call abstraction. But just like Franz Marc and Kandinsky, I would push that into what I call essentiation. That these are attempts to capture the essence of reality, which is connected to the soul. So art is a way for me to deal with that translation. And so I'm going to read you a passage from this. Let me take a drink first. And this chapter, I begin by describing what I see in my 25-meter walk from my farmhouse to the studio. And that became an entire chapter. I was quite surprised how much there is to write about what I see. And then I just like Kandinsky does, I try to connect what I see, what I observe, and what I do in the studio as a way to get to the soul. And just like Franz Marc, I'm trying to get to the essence, right? So rather than the non-essential, he calls it, which is probably things that we worry about every day, right? How do I pay my rent? How do I get to work on time? These are things that Franz Marc says it's actually non-essential. And art is trying to get at the essence. And here's me in a section called The Spiritual Quest, trying to get to the essence. A major art critic once told me kindly that if I did not associate myself with Christianity, I would be known as one of the great sublime painters of our time. I thanked him for his greatest compliment. But for me, I'm not associating myself with the institution of what is known as Christianity. I am a photo of Jesus, whom I found by following the stars. I follow Jesus, the greatest artist. I am drawing out what it means to live out that faith, to make beauty, to serve, to create communities of abundance along the way. Now, many assume that Christianity is a Western religion and find strange my association of slow art of the Eastern technique of Nihonga with the church. I tell them that the Bible is an Eastern document originating in the Middle East, then affecting the refinement of Western civilization and giving birth to Occidental sciences. The context of the Hebrew scriptures of what Christians call the Old Testament culturally is better understood in Asian cultures. For example, reading the book of Jeremiah or Lamentations in Japanese has a deeper resonance for me, rather than in our language of American individualism. Many Christian mystics throughout history, from St. Teresa to Thomas Merton, have had aesthetic values closer to those of Zen Buddhism than to Western industrialism. Even as these mystics sought their spiritual center in the historic figure of Jesus. In between the cracks created by the incessant cultural wars, East versus West, and market categories, I found a meaning place to nest. I call this journey a culture care path. Culture care is to steward the soil of culture as gardeners tend to their gardens. Just as the gaps of stone steps leading to my studio allowed speedwell flowers to thrive, the gaps resulting from years of cultural wars can invite unique beauty. My meandering journey between East and West can also open our eyes toward a language of peace that transcends these barriers. Markets demand identifiable brands, using Christian as a label and as an adjective, but my faith is a noun. and a verb that points to a renewal of all brokenness and loss, even in our polarized times, full of pulverized fragments. I am determined to continue to care for my land and learn from the soil how to steward our culture well, and my slow art flows out of that care. So here I am trying to connect the dots, and one of the ways that once again Kandinsky's words gain significance and meaning is by using these pulverized minerals and layering them here. It's hard to see this painting, but over 200 layers of pulverized vermilion and cinnabar and gold creates this movement that attempts to capture what our souls need to see the world. And I write in my previous book called Art and Faith, I try to describe this in detail using theological terms, so I will go with this a little bit and then show you one other image, and then we'll go into Q&A, okay? Now, this is a thesis that will take an entire lecture or maybe a week of lectures to unpack. But I note in this book something about biblical understanding of truth and reality. In the same way that Franz Marc was trying to attempt to distinguish between the essential and non-essential, I'm trying to get at the heart of what biblical writers were trying to get at. And many times in scripture readings and in churches and so forth, we miss what is essential, sometimes because of English translations, sometimes because of our assumptions that we make. So I write here the Greek word poieo, poema, or poietes, from which actually we get the word poem, right, or poets, appear over 3,200 times in a Septuagint Bible and over 80 times in the New Testament. Note the significance of this word. It means to make. Usually translators use the word do, as in becoming doer of the word in James 1, which reduces the generative possibilities and focuses on a rather industrial sense of the word. Remember that image by Franz Marc. So the doer of the word doer is poietes. So it literally means becoming a poet of the word. But the industrial translation would be a doer, and that's not a wrong translation, it's just, to me, incomplete. Part of theology of making is to bring full color of these words that have previously been interpreted in a narrower sense. This imaginative act released in a community is to see ourselves as poema, masterpieces, I translate, of God's design. Ephesians 2:8, right? So we are all poema, God's masterpieces, created in Christ Jesus through good works. The Bible begins in creation and ends in new creation. Everywhere in between is a narrative of the broken people of God somehow being invited back and back again to reestablish this relationship with the Creator and the Maker of the new, as heirs to the greater reality that this God is all about. God is an artist. God is the artist, the only true artist. And an artist creates and makes. God stated, "Let there be," and there was a world full of abundance and poetry. God invited us not to a church program, as important as they may be, but as N.T. Wright notes in his lectures, and actually he wrote the foreword to this book, and the foreword is worth the price of the book itself. Notes in his lectures, God invites us to a meal, a feast. God, the artist, invites little artists to a feast and a dance. And I understand now. It took Jesus to give himself to us, to shed tears for our current state for us, to be invited by grace. So in my studio and in my work, I am thinking about what Kandinsky said, the color and forms are connected to our souls. I'm thinking about Franz Marc attempted to depict before he was struck down by a bomb in front lines in Germany. And I am thinking about Malevich, who painted icons when that wasn't allowed, and somehow birthing modern art. And today, Hejin and I got to visit this work, which I haven't seen in about 8 years, which was painted in 2000. It's called Golden Pine. It's right here in Hong Kong. I hope you see this. It's at the Oxford House in Taikoo Place. It's the largest painting I've ever done. And you see on top, it's a tree, pine trees, covered in 2,000 sheets of gold, pure gold, because gold is a symbol of divinity in all cultures. And I am trying to bring in that spiritual reality into a work of art. And as people go up and down these stairs, I hope that countenance will bless people. This work is an invocation for God's design, the artist, the grand artist, to pour into our lives the grace and beauty that we perhaps lack in this world. Pine trees are symbol of longevity in China, but there's a very important work that I am indebted to in Japan called Shorinzu Byobu by Hasegawa Tohaku, an artist who depicted pine forests in simple sumi and calligraphy form. It's shown at Tokyo National Museum every January. It is a profound work of silence that brings in transcendence through very minimal strokes. So the heritage of Nihonga and Japanese history also brings in this dimension of spirituality as well. And so I think I will end by asking this question for all of us to consider. Why have we missed this? I think it's true in every sphere of what we do as human beings, whether you're an engineer or plumber or a chef or whatever you're doing, there is a spiritual dimension to what we do. And yet modernism has severed this reality, and which Kandinsky cries out against, right? He says, no, we cannot separate color and form to the spiritual and our souls. But we continue to create instruments that now algorithmically identify categories for the sake of the market success. And that continues to sever and dehumanize us, right? To create these categories that are separate as if that is possible to do. But I think these artists are telling us, and I hope my work can contribute a small amount of connection, that there is always a connection between your soul and what you make, what you do. And so whatever you're learning here in this university, or whatever you're pursuing in Hong Kong and in the world, I think the future will necessarily be drawn to the essence of what we do. And I think Franz Marco's right, that we have missed something in pursuing the non-essential success of our own making and definition. So some of you have received the card that has a description on it for my exhibit in Kaohsiung in Taiwan. Not too far away from here. The exhibit will be up for 1 year. So we're going to the opening tomorrow. Well, opening is next week, but we're flying to Taiwan tomorrow, hopefully avoiding the hurricane. For those of you who are able to travel, I hope you can come see. It's a rather substantial sort of exhibit, paired with another artist who is a ceramicist, and it's beautiful. Curated show, so I hope you can come and be part of that exploration of connecting the soul to color and form. So thank you very much. I'll go into Q&A right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Makoto. I appreciate that. And I've got the advantage of having the mic first. I think maybe Candy and the FGE team could help us. Thank you to Candy and Sam and Annie and Hua Lu and the rest of the FGE team. But before we go to the audience, I wanted to ask as well, you've convinced us about the presence of the spiritual in art historically, and then also for you personally. But I wanted to kind of ask your question back to you. What do you think in our contemporary society is causing people to be separated from or skeptical of either the aesthetic appreciation of art or the spiritual? And what would be the best way back? Would it be best to attempt a reclamation of the spiritual, or through the art and the aesthetic? Might that be a path for contemporary society? So what's the advice for us?
Well, that's a great question, and I think part of it is what all these artists point to, which is we are forced to reckon with the assumption of scarcity and reducing experience to false binaries. So we end up thinking that we must survive, and therefore this, right? We have to do this. We have to make a choice that we don't want to make, but we have, really no alternative. And that is what these artists are pushing back against. Franz Marc facing the war, painting with these bright colors, and even though these are images of struggle, and Kandinsky opening the path for abstraction and connecting sound to color. They're talking about the assumption of abundance instead of scarcity. And music is always about opening the space for abundance. Daniel's music, as we came in listening to that, really does the impossible, right? Even though we might come in with this heaviness or even struggling with the current realities of whatever we're struggling with and faced with. Music can open a space for at least an invitation to think that this is not all that seems to be, that it's not just the data points given to us in front of us, it's not what the categories that we are forced into determine the outcome of our actions, but there's something more to what we can create into the present circumstance. So artists can teach us to live in a world full of assumptions of scarcity, but to inject into it a question, what if question, what I call generative questions. What if this isn't all there is? What if the choice between A and B is not the only choices? What if we can turn it upside down or flip it into the air and see if there is something more to what I have been led to believe is the only path, this false binary path. And so creative thinking and developing your imagination through your senses to see the complexity of the world really is one way to train ourselves. And that's why I always say in a university like this, the arts, right, are fundamental, especially in the age of AI. Without the somatic development of your imagination, we will just keep going this path of reductivism, and we will shrink and shrink and shrink until there's nothing left. Kind of like that horse, trying to survive in this onslaught of reality pushing up against us. We will feel trapped, and we will not be able to find our own freedom. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Thank you. Very helpful. We have some time for some questions from the audience, if anybody would like to ask Makoto.
Mike is coming.
Bring in the mic.
Thank you very much. I was thinking of what you have just said, a rather sort of binary look at reality and the whole utilitarian as against the imaginative, and how you might pull the two together. And I was thinking of the optimism of the Renaissance, which totally changed the way that Western, the whole Western art went. Because, with that, you have science, you have money, you have a huge amount of patronage, similar today with AI and all kinds of things. But there was a great deal of optimism. And in a way, a lot of those Renaissance artists did play with reality and imagination. The idea of shadow, the light and the dark. The interesting thing is how that went on and on through the, ultimately 19th century and then into the 20th century, when people were hitting up against, the horrors of war, and then the whole thing falls apart. So it's an interesting question as to how you use AI as a kind of new Renaissance, in a way that is going to help us in a world that we hope won't fall apart. But do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do, and that's a great point. Thank you for raising that. And I did not mean to suggest unintentionally that there was no example of newness in the past at all. So let me address the Renaissance and what is remarkable. Let's talk about Frangelico for example, Florentine Dominican monk painting during the Black Plague, right? Painting images using gold and minerals, the same materials that I use, determined to create beauty when there was this enormous bleakness all around him. Why would he do that? What did he see? What did he hope for? What was he even in thinking about? Like a Dominican friar, painting using these very expensive materials when 1/3 of your population around you are dying. That seems ludicrous to think about, but that's what artists did. And because Frangelico did that, that created a condition in which Renaissance was made possible, right? So there are historical evidences of this that we can actually go back and see how the future was created literally out of these artists, these people who we may think is really crazy at times, turning the world upside down. And I think it's the same spirit that, Kandinsky and Franz Marc and all these people were creating out of. So this is not just the phenomenon of modern condition forcing us to, think in different ways. It really is a universal human condition. And I think you find this kind of example anywhere, and especially in distressed times and moments when human spirit is forced to reckon with the darkness, right? The brokenness, the violence in front of us. And it seems to me that that's a worthy journey to study that in whatever the field you might be in. The problem with AI is it promises so much of these advantages, fixing the problem that we might be facing without asking the deeper question, right? It has no point of view. So anything you program it to do, it can do it much faster and more accurately than we can now. But we can't forget that, as you note, there is this great possibility because of AI, what it can do, to help us to grasp and to live into more fully into the imaginative reality. And what I mean by that is not to allow just pattern matching ability of, artificial intelligence. I don't like that term because it's not really artificial or intelligent. It's really about pattern matching, and it's about creating these fantastic array of ways of looking at a same, dimensionless space, but it also I think allows for expansion of imagination, especially if we have the somatic reality to base our leaping, base our adventure on. And so again, I go back to the arts. I have spent the last 50 years training my hands as somatic knowledge. What that does is my hands know better than sometimes my rational side of what is true and good and beautiful. So I trust it. It's an intuitive process of trusting now what I have trained many years to do. Actors, Shakespearean actors on stage, playing Macbeth over and over and over again. and creating different ways of playing into that role, has this somatic knowledge that allows that actor to do something on stage that is new and fresh every time, right? The more capacity, the more training that you can have, but that, when that kind of somatic knowledge can be applied to solving problems, for example, that connection is seems to me the most exciting part of AI development.
Good. Anyone else from the audience? I think as we're thinking of a good question, I know you mentioned in your writing on Rothko and in your own work, a lot of these works, both in creation and appreciation, take a lot of time.
Right.
Sitting before a painting at least 15 minutes minimally before you're able to see layers. In the societies we live in, New York is very busy. Tokyo and Hong Kong maybe beats them all for the pace of life. What real advice would you give to us about how to habituate the stillness that's required to both to see and then even for those who are creative to pursue this? Any solutions you found for
no, thank you for asking. I know we noticed that in Hong Kong everything's faster, and neuroscientists have proven this, that if you spend 10 minutes in front of anything, but especially Rothko, a work of art, listening to music, or speaking to a friend, or your child, or your spouse, spending 10 minutes of beholding, stillness, even silence, can change how you see that relationship, how you see the world, actually. It opens up neurons that are not activated when we are on this. Because this is algorithmically forcing you to make quick decisions. So your brain has been now trained to not to see, not to hear. You make quick judgments. And therefore, our emotions are kind of rewired and reprogrammed to reach that conclusions very fast. So we are angrier, we're more anxious, we don't allow complexity to coexist because we want this black and white, and that's what this is forcing us to do. So, take a walk, take a long shower, make something. Making an omelet, I argue in my last book, was Art and Faith, it's rather difficult. As I found out during the pandemic, it doesn't matter how many times you watch on YouTube Jacques Papin making omelet over and over and you get the same pan. Your omelet doesn't taste anything like Jacques Papin's omelet. Why is that? It's such a simple thing to do, and yet there's somatic knowledge, there's complexity of reality, years and years of experience, right, that go into that. So any of these activities of making will force you to slow down. But you might just want to start by spending 10 minutes in front of anything. Just sit quietly, breathe deeply, allow whatever is in front of you to speak to you. Whether it be a flower, whether it be a painting, whether it be listening to music, just keep doing that, and you'll find that your senses open up, right? And then you're able to listen better to each other, and to be able to address the same issues that you're facing right now from a different angle.
Wonderful. Very good. We got one here, and we'll go here after that. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Fujimura-san.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Francis. And I'm very touched by your sharing just now on your book about your relationship with Christ, with Jesus, and with God. And for me, I'm also an artist myself, and I have been like reading art and just studying art. But like in the contemporary art world, like this is always, God is almost like a taboo. I mean, when I go to the Art Basel, all the contemporary like art houses, auction houses, this is never mentioned. And I find it, because for me it's very central. And I've always been hungry to for me it's one thing, but I don't see it. So I'm very happy to hear you sharing about how you actually is your main focus in a way. And I would like to hear more about your sharing have you always been like that? I'm sorry, and how do you face the resistance? Because the contemporary art world do not see this, right? And people may not appreciate, I don't know. I mean, I want to hear more about it because for me, it's very central to me. And sometimes I feel that I almost have to cover it. And not to mention Jesus in my works when actually it's so central to me as well. So I want to hear about your experience and is it important to be authentic or,
Yeah,
share more.
thank you. And you know, it is amazing when you walk into a world of any place. Or actually, it's true of any place in the world. Actually, you know, it's like you have to be Malevich. You know, you have to kind of translate your faith into a form that the world will accept. And it's like white on white, right? You have to reduce it and create this semiotic of hiddenness. And I suppose that's not a bad thing if you really think of it almost like a game you play with yourself and with the world. Because truth is always hidden. And we know that as Christians. We you know, Jesus told us that. So, but we are asked to not to give into this sense of despair that, oh, so therefore there's no way to communicate what is true and good and beautiful into the world that doesn't want that, right? Now that's also a reductivist assumption because I find that when I am honest with myself, when I am honest about my faith, my walk with Jesus, and you know, finding myself every day actually amazed that I get to be part of imagination of Jesus. That I'm sitting here because of that imagination being activated and being poured into me through God's Spirit. That this whole thing happened last minute by a simple email being sent to Daniel that, you know, my wife and her team, it's not just human effort. So there's something going on that drew me as part of what I would call Jesus' imagination that is being actively being played out in my life, right? So, and the fact that I can spend every day in the studio thinking about that, praying about that, and creating works that is simply trying to be as pure as I can, as Kandinsky was trying to do with his work, and Franz Marc, right, trying to address the essence of things, essential things. That is a enormous privilege that I have, and so I am filled with gratitude when I think about that. As far as the world is concerned, I don't expect the world to understand that. I don't. And it's okay if they push me back on it, or if they say, well, that, you know, you're kind of strange to photo Jesus in your world. That's fine. But what I find interesting is that a lot of times when I open up about my faith journey or struggles that I might go through to get to the essence of things. Artists are often very much with me. They may not use the same language, right? But they always think that's a noble work, and you don't have to be successful in what you're doing. Like you don't have to win this game. The fact that you're being authentic and honest and true to yourself is very, very attractive to people, because they're actually trying to do the same. They may not have the same way of addressing it. And, I get to tell them, actually, that is also part what I think is Jesus' imagination will play out into the world, is that we may not have these names that religion has placed on something or institution has placed on something. And these artists didn't really care about that. They assume that the system is already corrupt and that the truth and the essence of things cannot be expressed except through honest means, honest struggles. And so I can stand in front of these paintings and I can weep, I can understand they're where they were, and I hope that what I do can help others to find a way. And to me, there's something about God's imagination. I always say God's imagination is, because there's no translation necessary. What God imagines becomes reality. So we have to wrestle with our imagination becoming reality. You as an artist have to translate that onto canvas or sculpture or whatever you're making. But with God, that's not true. So for me to believe, have this faith is literally walking into that reality of possibility that exists every moment. I call it Genesis moments, but every moment is a Genesis moment. And if we are aligned to God's imagination, which has produced abundance, which has produced goodness and truth, it's filled with truth, filled with goodness, then I don't think any kind of pushback matters to me. Because even if I am, surrounded with people who are antagonistic or whatever, or apathetic, it really doesn't change that reality of God. Yeah.
Thank you. We had a question over here. Samuel?
Yeah, thank you so much, Makoto. I just wonder, actually, you talk about these modern artists, actually, how they express them, the connecting, actually, the art with spirituality. What does these modern art, actually, in terms of their uniqueness, in terms of connecting art or human expression or perception with that deep reality, whether that's something they try to recover, help us to recover from this phase of industrialization, which somehow has suppressed certain capacity of human beings by through over this rationality, or there's certain kind of regimes of doing things or thinking about certain patterns. So is that, for example, actually emotion or even your touch, you mentioned about that, have been suppressed. So is that in your own artistic actually creativity, do you also follow that kind of reaction to that industrialization process, or basically also trying to go back to recover what traditional Japanese or Asian way of perception, to uncover the full capacity of a human, what it means to be human, and to connect with, the divine world.
That's a really good point. That is the problem of this separation that Kandinsky is talking about, right, from reality, and Franz Marc and others, that they were experiencing the separation between what is essential soul and non-essential, which is the industrial. We have become human doings rather than human beings. Right, that's what they were saying. So what does that do? And that's that same sense exists in Asian interpretation of the world. How does modernism affect its, for instance, Japanese art and Japanese culture? In some ways, in Japan, I think they have swallowed it whole. The Western this notion that in order to be successful as a nation, you have to be, you have to have 70 nuclear power plants, right? So this industrialization of human beings becoming human doings have taken over even Japanese context, and so this reality that to me is so essential, what Franz Marc would say essential in Japan, would be to recover this sense of integration between nature and culture, of being fully human in the context of Japanese history and culture, as well as admitting to its atrocities, by the way. But it is part of reclaiming the integration of the wholeness of whole ecological, sociological reality of Japanese culture. And by the way, I think if we can do that, we will begin to see something miraculous in terms of the gospel integration embedded in Japanese culture come out. Rather than thinking of Japan as a nation that's antagonistic or has persecuted Christians over and over in its history, which is true. The reverse of that is that Japan can model this type of integration, I think, in a unique way. And so, to me, my insistence on using Japanese materials and being part of this ecosystem of Nihonga, and creating something new out of it. So I don't really fit into the Nihonga Salon system, but I really think that I am deeply connected to the substance of Japanese, essence of Japanese culture, especially in 16th century Japan, is very much at the heart of what I am trying to get at. So the integration that you're speaking of is very much part of it. What I do think that the modernist artists like Rothko and Agnes Martin and others have done is to flip the entry point, and they are giving us an alternative point of view in terms of how we view the disintegration and fragmentation of modernism, but to look at it through an Eastern lens, as it were. And what that does to me, and in some ways, Kandinsky and Franz Marc and Malevich are doing the same thing, but they allow us to see the fault lines of modern conception of reality. that we can only be human doings and not human beings, and allow us perhaps a new way of creating and developing that. It's, to me, incomplete because it doesn't allow us to deal with the full complexity of reality. It's a kind of essentiation that pushes itself to abstraction and not essentiation. but I think it's a good beginning. It's a good start. Again, going back to the AI conversation, this is an area. This area of mystery is something that is unexplored and quite potentially can change how we create this imaginative future that using AI effectively to develop part of our brain perhaps that has not been trained to open up the mystery of reality. I think this is something that I see great potential in, and I don't know who's interested in this. I don't know if you crazy people, but I think eventually we will have to come to that because other parts of this human doing part will only reduce and reduce and reduce our capacity. And we see evidence of that today in many ways, in education and other places. But I also think the other way is possible. So.
I think we have time for maybe one more question from the audience. We can go here. Yeah.
Hi, Marco. Thank you so much. I have a question, or more of a reflection as a wife and an artist as well. I understand and really appreciate you're focusing on the essence and the spirituality in art. But Jesus, a lot of the Bibles and a lot of the gospel is about doing. It's about being with the orphans and widows and the people. He does pray, and there is that spirituality element which we should try to pursue. But oftentimes, maybe especially in the high art, sort of like the auction houses and the way the art is being sort of misled is so devoid, and it's being exclusive to the elites and the sort of community. And I think it's I want to ask: how do you address the inadequacy of art being so focused on the spiritual and the essence, and missing the addressing the physical and the doing? And I think the partnership that you have with Haijin, she's doing the justice and the beauty part. It's amazing partnership. And that is what, my family is trying to mimic as well. But I find just the art by itself, how do you address, can you come to a holistic way of sharing the gospel, the spiritual, but also the love in a physical and very moral way?
Well, thank you. And that's why I think the translation of becoming doer of the word is problematic. It sets up this dichotomy, which the biblical writers did not intend. Doing and being is poietes, right? That this is literally, it's an integrated word. And so one of the ways that we can address that, by the way, my wife and I wrote a book called Beauty and Justice that's coming out, which addresses that issue. But look at the lives of artists. Now, they are treated as kind of this elite, reality. But you read the writings of Vincent van Gogh. Look at his work, Potato Eaters. We just came back from Amsterdam. I stood in front of that painting thinking about what caused Vincent to be among the poor, right? To serve the poorest of the poor, and to paint about it. And that was his essence. That was how he was trying to get to the essential. And so, Mark Rothko, the same thing. When I was writing afterward for his writing, which his son Christopher Rothko was compiling or re-editing. I read through that and I was just so struck with this sense, sense of pathos for the world. What he wanted in terms of emotional access through his work was not that he become this powerful elite figure, but that he connect with the people, the ordinary person. Yes, artists are idealistic and they sometimes overinflate the possibility of that. But at the same time, don't we want to live in a world where people think and live and act and make like that, right? And so I don't think they are separate. I think if you pursue beauty, you also pursue justice. The English word fair is a great word, beautiful word, because it is both fair. We seek a fair world. That means you're seeking a just world and beautiful world. So I don't think we need to separate the two. And I think when I see works of justice being done, truly done, with long-term solutions rather than short-term gain, that's beautiful. There's nothing more beautiful than that, or seeing a child whose life has been liberated from this terrific generational oppression, and thinking and dreaming with a child about what that child can become 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how the mothers and grandmothers trapped in the brothels can be liberated to gain not only their freedom, but to be able to create a future that they dream about. Those are the most beautiful moments for me as an artist, and I feed off of that. I'm like, I might be painting something very minimalistic and abstract. People call it abstract, I call it essentiation. but that pathos that Rothko was after, I have lived that. I have seen it in action. So that's not something that is alien to me or something that is abstract. That is real. That's the true essence. That's the true reality. And so I hope that helps. I hope that makes some connections. And by the way, the Christian church ought to be a place where that is so obvious. That the brokenness is not something to be avoided. It is an entry point. We walk through Christ's wounds, post-resurrection wounds. We worship a God who is wounded still, intentionally and lovingly. So we are healed through that. And so that sense of presence of this reality of brokenness in front of us that has been transfigured into glory, that is what we must seek in the church. So to me, church is God's artwork, the masterpiece that is already in front of us, even as we struggle with the deficiencies and the brokenness of it. So I hope that helps.
Wonderful. I think that's a wonderful way for us to end our evening. So thank you for your questions. And let's give Makoto one more thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate so much. We're very glad that this worked for you to come, and thank you to Hee-Jean and to Makoto for making this trip on their way to Taiwan. We, of course, want to remind you, those of you who got the cards, to do try and make that short trip to Taiwan. We're going to try to switch the slides just briefly as we say goodnight. We have some other events that are coming up in our McDonald Distinguished Lecture Series, and we just want to share those with you on your way out. And so in November, we'll be having Tyler Vanderweel from the Harvard Global Flourishing Project coming with a topic on updating flourishing, what that means. He'll be with us in November 9th and 10th. And then also we have a series of seminars in our Christianity in China series. Professor Samuel Chen and Annie Nia help with that. So even if we don't get our slides to work, we'd still love to have you join us for those events. But thank you so much for your time here tonight, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.